Okay, we're all set. These are pictures from Uganda behind me. They were again sent from Pastor George to John. There's some of the other stuff that Pastor George does. They provide meals for orphans there, and he's related that each child is about $70 a month. So he's got quite a ministry going there, and we're just so honored to be part of his ministry. There's Pastor George right there. He'll be back in March, I believe, and I don't have any specifics yet, but we look forward to that. And Larry reminded me, I had another announcement. Jan Spillett sent the church a letter also. My sister, brother, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for being a friend to our mom, Elaine Jackson. Thank you for the cards you sent, meals, and visits when she couldn't get to church anymore. Thank you for everything that you did for Mom's funeral. It made a difficult time much easier. God bless you all. Jan Spillett. So, sorry I forgot to do that in the announcements, but we're okay now. All right. An inventory. We're going through the book of Nehemiah. We covered all of chapter 6 2 weeks ago. Last week we weren't here because of that storm. But we looked at the latest tactic by Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem against Nehemiah. They have gravitated from the running interference and trying to build the enemies successfully all around Jerusalem to stop the wall from being built. Having failed at that, they're going after Nehemiah personally now with an attack on his character. Sanballat and Geshem specifically charged Nehemiah in chapter 6 with treason, saying the only reason he's building this wall is to prepare an army to gain independence from King Artaxerxes, and they threatened to tell the king that. And in addition to that, Tobiah, working separately, convinced some priests and prophets within Jerusalem to offer sanctuary to Nehemiah within the very temple so that he could hide there to prevent any murder attempts from getting to him. That, of course, would have been an act of cowardice, using God's house to hide in, and that was a deliberate attack, an attempt to lessen Nehemiah in the eyes of his constituents. I liken this strategy to what was performed against Justice Brett Kavanaugh, having failed to gain enough support to prevent him from being appointed to the Supreme Court. His enemies started attacking his character, fabricating a complete, total lie that could have destroyed his reputation, his life, and his ability to provide for his family. All in order to get what they want. Well, instead of succumbing to either tactic, Nehemiah, with very little defense of himself, simply continued working on the wall and allowed the reputation he'd gained by following God to carry him through. And God worked a miracle. He completed the wall. Remember, this is a 2.5 mile wall, 2.5 miles in circumference, 39 feet high, 8 feet wide, completed in 52 days. That's a miracle. And the result of Nehemiah staying focused on the task at hand and allowing his good character to defend him is illustrated best in Nehemiah 6:16. This one verse, when all the enemies heard of it, that is, that the wall was finished in 52 days, and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Now that wasn't the end of it, of course. The next verse, Nehemiah 6:17, talks of the next strategy, that of letters going from Tobiah to the nobles in Judah, and from the nobles in Judah back to Tobiah, all spreading rumors against Nehemiah. And not only that, but Nehemiah details for us that these things were made possible because Tobiah and his son both married into wealthy Jewish families, giving them the contacts and information so that anything that is said within Jerusalem, Nehemiah can count on that getting outside to his enemies. So he had that problem to deal with as well. So with that, let's see what we move on to in chapter 7. Nehemiah chapter 7. Now, when the wall was rebuilt, and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, and the singers, and the Levites were appointed, then I put Hanani, my brother, and Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, in charge of Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. Then I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. Now I'm going to just break there for a moment because it's kind of an awkward thing to be said, and there's a possible other translation of this because of the difficulty in translating between the Hebrew and English. It could mean don't open the gates when the sun is at its hottest because the guards might fall asleep. So that might be what they're trying to say there. I just want to introduce that to you. And while they are standing guard, let them shut and bolt the doors. Also appoint guards from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, each at his post, and each in front of his own house. Now the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few, and the houses were not built. Then my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the people to be enrolled by genealogies. Then I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up first, in which I found the following record. There you go. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away, and who returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own city, who came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Milshan, Mispereth, Bigvai, Heham, Bana. And then we have verse 7. It says, the number of men of the people of Israel. And then we go into a long list, which I'm not going to read, up to verse 66, which says the whole assembly together was 42,360. Now, verses 64 and 65, just before 66, just as they did with Ezra, they speak of the people being considered unclean because their genealogical record was not clear or was not complete, and so they were considered unclean and unable to minister for God. Verses 67 through 72 are basically an inventory of servants, singers, horses, mules, camels, and donkeys, finishing with an inventory of what the people gave, including 41,000 gold drachmas, including 1,000 from Nehemiah. And a gold drachma, 1,000 gold drachmas is equal to about 19 pounds of gold, personally given by Nehemiah. And in all, a total of 750 pounds of gold. Also contributed were 4,200 silver minas, 50 basins, and 530 priestly garments, also given by Nehemiah, and 67 more priestly garments donated by various others. So that gives you a summary of what is included in chapter 7, which ends with verse 73. Now the priests and Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the temple servants, and all Israel lived in their cities. And when the 7th month came, the sons of Israel were in their cities. So, the project's done. Nehemiah, the cupbearer to the king, in charge of tasting food for the king, is told by God to change his entire life, to move 900 miles to Jerusalem, and to be the engineer, basically, of a wall project. So Nehemiah starts right out securing the city in chapter 7. Now that the wall's done, the job isn't done. The real job is just starting now. He puts 2 trusted people in charge of the gates, and by extension, the security of Jerusalem. He puts his brother in charge. Remember, his brother, back in chapter 1, is the one who told him about the problem in the first place. That's Hananiah. And he puts Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, in charge of security. Now, the fortress is right here. As I said, this north wall, it's 2.5 miles in circumference, and this north wall is the one that's most vulnerable to attack because it offers the best approach to the Jerusalem compound. And the citadel, which Hananiah was in charge of, is right inside this wall, and the temple is in this area right here. So within this chapter are elements that comprised Jerusalem's security. that Nehemiah set up immediately upon completion of the wall. And the first was to set up leadership, which we just mentioned. Next, gatekeepers. In order for the security to be sound, you needed good gatekeepers, men assigned to the task of whether or not to allow visitors in. And just to emphasize the importance of gatekeepers, the Great Wall of China has been breached, a known breach, 4 times. And in each of the 4 instances, the breach occurred not because the wall was weak, but because the gatekeepers had been bribed. So it's a very important assignment for gatekeepers. And next, guards, people who patrolled the entire perimeter of the wall. There were 2 categories within the guards, those who patrolled the perimeter and those who watched out from their house because they happened to live near the wall. Nehemiah set up both of these to protect Jerusalem. Among the 42,000 that were mentioned, 7,000 servants. So 1 of every 6 people in Jerusalem was a servant. Nehemiah detailed for us 29,818. And I don't think it was a male-female thing that explains the discrepancy between that and the 42,000. He was just detailing particular groups within that 42,000, such as servants, priests, guards, etc. So I think that accounts for the discrepancy. So up until this point in Nehemiah, it's been all about the wall. How to get the wall completed, how to get the gates set up and taken care of, and how to secure the city. Putting out fires that popped up along the way. And as I said, now that the wall is done, the real work for Nehemiah begins as governor. It's the life they've been waiting for the completion of the wall to begin. And we're going to see some stark similarities between what's going on in Jerusalem in Nehemiah 7 and what's going on in New York today. Remember, God commanded Nehemiah to do this. Protect the city with a wall. God's directive. The city in which God's Son would ride eventually, minister to many, and then die forever. This is the importance of Nehemiah's project, preparing it for Christ himself. And praise God, he was able to complete that mission. Note one of the things Nehemiah does upon finishing the perimeter. He takes a census and documents each citizen's heritage. And he uses the same census that Ezra took when Ezra arrived 7 years previously. Part of the process is reviewing very close to the same list Ezra provided in Ezra 2, 1 through 64, which I also did not read. But if you compare those two, you'll see great similarities and a few small changes from about 90 years prior. Now, we assume that the few changes or adjustments or maybe mistakes that were corrected or some other minor things, but all in all, the lists are very similar. The list in total could be compared to the number of people who arrived on the Mayflower into America. It's a very important list. God's people chosen for a very particular purpose. The remnant preserved by Nehemiah with the completed wall. These are the people that will carry on the same mission that Moses was tasked with carrying on when he led the people from Egypt to the Promised Land. This is sort of a repeat performance. That's why the census is so important. These are the people God is depending upon to do his work. So when you look at it that way, you can see why the genealogy is so important here. These were the people willing to pick up their lives and everything from Babylon, where they lived probably pretty easily. Babylon was a very wealthy place when they left it, and moved to basically an unsettled country. No picnic. They did it for God and God alone. This is what God expects of his people. Now, if the land outside the walls were all that they had to be concerned about, That's one thing. Life would have been easier. But the real danger Nehemiah was protecting against was the tendency for communities to allow outside influences in. Thought patterns that are different from those God directed was one of the things Nehemiah was protecting against. And now we're going to take a look at an example of what Nehemiah was trying to prevent by getting this wall finished in 52 days. Here in New York, we have a representative. I heard this story from Reverend Jason J. McGuire, and I'm thankful. But here in New York, we have a representative, Linda Rosenthal, from, I believe, Brooklyn, definitely in one of the New York City boroughs. And she introduced a bill recently to protect unhatched chickens by making it illegal to hatch them in a school environment. Her bill proposed to prohibit hatching eggs in school. And she did this out of compassion for the hatchlings, which might be born on a Saturday. They might hatch on a Saturday, which would mean they wouldn't have anybody to care for them until Monday. She was very concerned about that. Also, a mother hen tends to turn the eggs about 30 times a day so that the hatchling inside doesn't stick to the egg and when it's hatched have deformities. So she was concerned that the students weren't going to be responsible and turn the eggs enough. Also, in the wild, chickens have a hen and a rooster to take care of it. She didn't want students thinking this is the normal way of life. And hatching chickens in school tends to create a false environment for kids in their understanding of how animals survive in the wild. So out of her concern for these animals, Representative Rosenthal thought this would help. And here's what I'm talking about. Representative Rosenthal, one of the staunchest supporters of the Reproductive Health Act that passed on Tuesday. She cares about the unhatched chicken, but not the unborn child. This is a perverted thought pattern that Nehemiah is fighting against. You might think it's thought control or some sort of inappropriate way to prevent bad things from happening. But remember, Nehemiah was tasked by God. Nehemiah was blessed by God to finish this wall in 52 days, to prevent things like the Reproductive Health Act, which allows abortion up to the day of birth. We will now become a destination for mothers who decide not to have a baby they're carrying at any time in the pregnancy, from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, anywhere, because we now have the loosest law in the land. And not only that, I'm sorry to say, I wish I was done, but it is now illegal for a counselor to counsel a person of any age from going for a sex change operation. Illegal for any counselor to counsel anyone against a sex change operation. So we can see in our country how different worldviews bring about different lines of thought. How difficult it is once you get someone who's persuasive, someone who has been blessed with articulation, how they can convince people of things that can be totally against God's plan. It's how we ended up getting the government shut down. Because walls are immoral, they say. Schisms like this reach down to every person within the community. So it's more than just repelling invaders that God is working within this community. It's also repelling lines of thought, different worldviews, ungodly things from entering God's community. And Nehemiah knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because as he was doing this project, focused on building a wall in 52 days, 2.5 miles in circumference, 39 feet high, 8 feet wide, an enormous project. He was enduring personal attacks to get him to try to fail. Different lines of thought. And why were they trying to get him to fail? Because they wanted to be the ones to influence the community within Jerusalem to do what they wanted them to do and to profit from it. That's the big picture of what Nehemiah was battling against and what he documented for us in his great book. The work of sinful man, working for himself, not for the good of anybody else. I pray for this state. I pray that you will experience a revival. It's one of the darkest states spiritually in the country. Maybe number one. After the laws passed on Tuesday that the governor couldn't wait to sign. Couldn't wait. In fact, he did it the same day they were passed, Tuesday, which is rather unusual. That is what we're dealing with. That's the battle we're dealing with. Let's pray. Dearest Lord, Heavenly Father, there's only one way to prepare for what you are warning us against in the book of Nehemiah and elsewhere, and that is to stay in your word, to stay close to you, to know your will, to study this book as if it were your biography, a biography on you, which in many ways it is. Help us to see clearly, Lord, what you want us to see as we study your word, as we dig into every word in your book. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for this ability to meet and congregate. Many places in the world can't do it, not legally. The first Christians couldn't do it legally. Had to meet in homes, secretly. Lord, if it comes to that, so will we. We're grateful for all you've given us. Protect us, Lord. Provide for us, as we know you will. And we're just so grateful for your many blessings. In Jesus' name, amen.